Fantastic. So I'm going to start by just introducing myself. I'm Jodie McGoldrick and I am part of CEL. I have been a teacher for way too long and I'm now doing my PhD in education. Over to you.
Thank you. My name's Ian Johnson. I'm I'm teaching fellow in learning development for the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at Portsmouth, a role I've been doing in some form for about 10 years. And to boil it down, that role means helping students with academic skills and what they need to do to be successful in assessments. Also a graduate of the EdD programme. The first cohort here at Portsmouth started in 2017, finished in 2023, and within my thesis I used thematic analysis and got really interested in it. Now I teach some classes to the postgraduates here now, and I think you'd seen bits I'd done on that, hadn't you, and thought it would be good if we talked thematic analysis a bit more.
Absolutely, and thank you for joining me today because you delivered a session to PhD researchers on Braun and Clarke. That's when I realised I was saying it wrong.
Everybody always wants to say Braun. It looks like Braun.
Yeah, it does, and it was absolutely fantastic, your session, and that's when I was like, please can we sit down and have a chat, because you helped clarify some of the misunderstandings I'd had, and I had come from it as a perspective where I was like, I did it for my master's and I'm doing it for my PhD, I'm an expert. And it was so funny to sit down with you in that session and be like, no, actually there's a lot of nuances here and I misunderstood some things.
Be interesting what we'll get by putting that together, because I kind of like don't think I'm an expert in it either, but it's I got very interested in it, and I can tell the story of that if you want me to, how that kind of happened at some point.
Absolutely, if you'd like to, that'd be amazing.
So I was trying to I was probably in the kind of awkward middle bit of writing up my thesis, and I was trying to sort of force myself to get on and do some things. So I proposed a session, I think it was for a research group here at Portsmouth, but it's also been to conferences and stuff. When I looked a bit at Braun and Clarke's work, and it was called Themes Do Not Emerge. So that was the kind of catchy hook. And I was basically laying out how I was going to do thematic analysis. I challenged myself to do that by doing that thing where you submit an abstract and you need to get something ready by a certain date to present it. Because I thought after I'd presented it, I'd be able to write it up as my methodology chapter. So it's kind of to give myself that kick. But the more I looked into it, the more I realised that there was to it. So I got very interested in this idea of themes do not emerge that Braun and Clarke had. They may be citing somebody else when they said that, actually. I don't know if my citation's right there, but they certainly wrote about it. And it went from there, really.
And I love that. I think that's something really powerful, because when I started my research, I had a topic and I was like, this is going to be the most interesting part. It's researching and finding out what it was with young people and educators, what they think. And as I got more into the process, it was more the methodology and the way of analysing that I got far interested in. And it's funny how I flipped that way, because I never thought that would be me. And it was my supervisor who said at the end, like, you're researching the methods as well. Like, you need to make this a research question because you're thinking really critically about how you do this. So I love that you had that kind of same experience, that it became, instead of just like a part, it became something really critical in itself.
Yeah, and I think that the thing that Braun and Clarke said, so something that you would have heard if you came along to that session, but that their 2006 paper, where they kind of, I don't know if it was introduced or really firmed up what thematic analysis was. It's the paper that everybody cites for Braun and Clarke. But they'd also done a lot more recent writing, continued to do, but it's looking at papers from around 2019 to 21 kind of era, when they really got big on the term reflexive thematic analysis. And one thing they were saying is that regularly they see people saying, I'm doing thematic analysis, brackets, Braun and Clarke 2006, move on. So they sort of see their work cited and people saying that they're adopting their methods. And I think they acknowledge at some some points in those later papers that maybe they weren't 100% clear, or that what they'd articulated in 2006 got misinterpreted or twisted. But they don't like the idea of thematic analysis is not atheoretical. So it must fit in with your own methodology, and there are different forms of it that can fit in with different methodologies. And I think their big point later on was people need to think about that and articulate that when they write it up.
Absolutely. And you talk about them being cited. I read that in kind of an updated, I think it was 2017, so it's even probably more so than at the minute, they were the 9th most cited article of all time. And I imagine,
really? Wow.
yeah, and that was a 2014 kind of analysis that looked into that. And I you know, in the 9 years since, 11 years since, even more so, I imagine that they have been so incredibly cited. And I think a lot of what I've read is interesting, that it doesn't really break down that nuance between theory and, like, this is like a step of doing things. But we will get onto that in just a second. Before, I think it could be good just to start, in your own words, what are some of the benefits of using thematic analysis, and why is it so important in qualitative research?
I think it's great for especially if you've got a big-ish sample of data, or you've got multiple flows of data kind of flowing into your project. And I think that it shouldn't be regarded as an easy method, which I think is another thing that Braun and Clarke kind of were against, was their method being seen as an easy option. But it gives a systematic way to deal with quite a lot of data and bring out points in common that you've got in it. And I think that's the crucial thing. It's like, if you've got quite a lot, it can be like, where do I start? And actually, if you use thematic analysis, it's encouraging you to kind of group things, start by heading things kind of quite literally to what the data is telling you, but then regroup that into themes that tell kind of stories. And I think the other thing as well that's probably important to say at this point, especially if this conversation is being watched by people on undergrad degrees, or we're probably debating nuances of it at postgrad level, but for undergrads, I think that it's important to know that you are part of analysing the data. And that might seem an obvious thing to say, but you're not. If you're doing education or a subject like that, it's not like a hard science where you've got to be pretending to be completely objective. You are coming at data from your point of view, with all your own positions that you've developed on the subject. And I think that thematic analysis, particularly this reflexive form, allows for a bit of that in how you go about analysing it. It puts that out on the table instead of pretending that it doesn't exist. And I think that's where the themes do not emerge idea is quite interesting, because what Braun and Clarke was saying there is that the themes aren't sitting in your data like an object awaiting discovery that will pull itself out. It's actually you as the researcher doing the pulling out. And in qualitative research, what one of us makes of a set of data does not have to be completely consistent with what the next person makes of it, as long as you are sort of acknowledging the positions you're coming from, why, how that fits in with all your research questions. But I think thematic analysis allows the space for that. It allows the space for you to interpret the data kind of in your way. I'm not saying it's completely unobjective or unscientific, it's not, but that I think is one of the big benefits of it.
Fantastic. And I'm going to come back in a little while on terms of like unobjective and how to make it rigorous. But just to kind of recap what you said there, when you talk about masses of data, we're kind of referring to, if you do interviews, for example, you might have pages and pages of transcripts. And that when you can have those for the first time, it can feel really overwhelming. And especially if people have had different opinions on something. And by using kind of this process, it can help you start to see where there are kind of overlapping viewpoints. But in addition, you mentioned kind of different forms of data as well. So, for example, being able to use interviews with kind of long answer, like survey questions, and being able to
Yeah.
analyze that together. Is that what you were referring to?
Yes, I think so. But for example, you might have an interview in a focus group, or you might
Yeah.
have thematic analysis is less apt for survey questions, but it can
Yeah.
be okay if you ask open questions. So
Okay.
it's more designed for data where you've interviewed people or actually spoken to them. But yeah, like I say, it can't handle data quantitatively. That's
Yeah.
not the aim of it.
Yeah.
It's not all about how many times is something there. It's all about giving power to the words of people and what is that quote actually saying. So yeah, it could be with survey questions, but probably just open questions with qualitative
Yes.
answers.
Fantastic. So, in the sense that if we had a student who was adopting mixed methods and they did a kind of Likert scale type responses, they would
Yeah,
need a different form of analysis for that, but it would be fine for them to use thematic analysis on their interviews or if they were open questions as such. And it's
that's
fine to
right.
kind of blend analysis styles.
Yes, that's right. I think it would need something else for the Likert style
Yeah.
questions. Sometimes what students do is do a survey with people and get that kind of as an initial data sample to help inform them what to ask in more detail in an interview. So you can kind of separate out those parts of the process. But no, it couldn't
Fantastic.
really analyze Likert scales, but there isn't a problem with that being in the same project.
Hmm. Yeah.
As long as it's treated differently.
I've got you completely. And it comes back to what you were saying earlier about your positionality. And hopefully, all of our students will be well used to the terms epistemology and ontology. And it's making sure that however you're analysing, you can bring it back to the way that you're viewing the knowledge.
Yeah, but I think I could break that down a bit more really,
Yeah.
because the all the ologies and the isms can be some of the most confusing things,
Mhm.
and you can sometimes find different words for the same thing. But very often in educational research, you'll be doing some research within a paradigm of interpretivism or sometimes called constructionism or something like that, social constructionism. These are all approaches where people's opinions are valid data, and you're
Yeah.
not looking just for scientific numbers. That would be another kind of research called positivism.
Hmm.
And in interpretivist research, it is all about what's people's experience, what's people's perspective or opinion on. And that's the sort of question that thematic analysis can really help you to answer. So it's almost always suitable for that sort of research, and within research, certainly mine and I think yours, there's been that kind of data coming of what's people's experience been, or what's their opinion or perspective on, for example.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. In terms of then, one of the things I think I reflect on a lot is about how kind of flexible thematic analysis can be during the process. So, is it necessary that students follow the I'm going to say 1 to 5 because the 6 is kind of writing the report, but the
Mhm.
1 to 5, how would you suggest students approach that? Is it always every piece of data you have to go 1 to 5, or can you mix it around?
So like one is familiarize yourself with the data, which is just encouraging you to read it a lot before you get
Yeah.
started on the process. So that's nearly always a good idea. The more familiar you can make yourself with the data, better. Um,
And
but
sorry, just to
two,
jump in there with a question. So
yeah,
if they had one interview and they wanted to get straight on the analysis, would you recommend waiting for all of their interviews to be finished or to start with the first one?
that's a tricky question.
Mm,
I don't know about that because I suppose analyzing one of them could be quite informing for what they're doing in the other ones, but at the same time you don't want to influence how you go about doing the interview based on stuff.
mhm.
You don't want to sort of decide where it's going for the subsequent interviews before you do them. Otherwise you might sort of subtly introduce your own biases. I think ideally you'd have all of them done before you start analyzing, but I think you can be be flexible with that. And back to your other question about, do you need to follow these 6 stages very religiously? I mean, 2, 3, 4, and 5, to break this down for people who might not know thematic analysis yet, go from coding data at kind of the most surface level, up and up and up through turning the codes into themes. So sort of what you're looking for is things in common. So people won't use the same words if it's 2 different interviews, for example, but their thing might have a theme or a story in common. So you'd probably start with a lot of codes, and you would build up through almost a pyramid, because you'd only be looking typically for like 5 themes at the end of a piece of thematic analysis is normal. So it's like, how do you get from that big sample of data to 3 or 5 themes? The process of the stages is designed to take you there, but certainly I don't think you've got to be too religious. So it's not a rule book, and I think that I found myself during my first phase, I just had too many codes, and it was getting unwieldy, and I was looking at the list, and it was too big, and I started to combine them into groups, probably ahead of where Braun and Clarke would say you do that in the approach. So that might be in phase 3 for them. I kind of merged 2 and 3 a little bit to start grouping things as I went. So I think there is flexibility. I don't know if that was your experience of it, of whether you saw it as 4 distinct stages in the middle, or did you kind of combine them?
I had the very similar experience, that as I was coding and I started to realize that some codes, I was like, I think I'm going to put that with another code. And in terms of practical sense, I did it initially just kind of like you're highlighting your physical documents. And then I started creating tables on a Word document. And as I was putting the codes there and copying over the quotes so I could do thick descriptions later, I realized that some were similar. So just in my mind, I started putting them in similar places in the table.
Yeah. And it's like, there's that word and there's that word, but they basically mean the same thing. So you don't need to end up with a code for each word. Trying to think of what a good example of this would be, but they never come when you're trying.
No, they never do. But I guess I'm trying to think of, like, if someone says I'm deflated or I'm frustrated, a lot of those are coming down to the same kind of idea. It's a reaction to something, right?
Yeah, and like in my project, for example, I'd find that sometimes you'd get positive words. So there'd be like the word thrive, or can't think of other examples, but you would end up with like, right, these are all talking positively about the experience and these more negatively. And it's that sort of grouping that happens quite naturally as you go through the process, because what you can end up with, I'm going to get into Braun and Clarke technical stuff a little bit here, but they talk about buckets, and you can end up with everything in a bucket that's the answer to the same research question that you've asked all your interviewees. So I imagine like that's kind of different colors of sand going into the same bucket, with each person you interview being a color. But actually what you're looking for later is not to present the theme as the bucket, but what can you pick out of different buckets? What sand kind of combines together to make the themes? There's a really excellent series of videos this on Victoria Clarke of Braun and Clarke, her YouTube channel. If anyone's watching this and wants to find it, you just search Victoria Clarke on YouTube and it should be the first one that comes up. And there were 4 videos from about 2017, I think, that talk through thematic analysis, and that's where this bucket idea came from. They're very well worth a watch now.
Yeah, and I'm going to be linking to the website as well, which I think is fantastic, the one that they're updating quite regularly, because I think that's something definitely that I've considered, is that like criticality, because in the first instance you can just kind of like, well, this is what everyone said about my research question, but the form of being critical is to find kind of a theme beyond that. So it's not just a response, but is there something that's drawing people together? Like, are they hopeful? Is it a systematic issue? But before I do jump onto that, just another question, just about kind of practical practical thematic analysis. So I'm
Yes.
a big fan of a table on a Google Doc, on a Word doc, because
Yeah.
I quite, because then I can add all my extra rows and it allows me to see my codes. Then I start having my themes, and like I say, then I can take my quotes. So when I'm coming to write my report, it's a lot easier for me.
Yeah.
Some people get out all the paper and they're getting out the highlighters and they're doing the mind map type thing. What is your chosen go-to?
I mean, right. So talking about doing this for my doctoral research,
Hmm.
I used a program called NVivo to do it.
Right.
Um, the name of NVivo is thrown around quite often, so that might be
Hmm.
one that students hear about. But NVivo just allows you to do the process of thematic analysis in a computerized way.
Hmm.
However, I'm going to caveat that and say it takes a lot of work to learn NVivo and to learn
Yeah.
how to use it well. And I am also a big fan. I've done other projects since then with either the pen and paper approach with literal colored highlighters. You know, you want to be using the same colored highlight for words that you think will group together and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And what you spoke about, which is like a matrix in Excel or Google Sheets, where,
Yeah.
put simply, you'd have kind of your people down the left-hand side, maybe each of
Hmm.
your individual interviewees, and then along the top, you'd have the themes as you develop them and
Yeah.
marry up. You know, who's talking about that theme, what's the memorable quote that they've given, put it in there, and then they're
Hmm.
easy to retrieve. And you know, when I'm asked about thematic analysis or to support students with it at undergrad or even master's level, I normally recommend going that route.
Yeah.
I think if you're going higher up than that and trying to do academic publications, then you've got to learn NVivo. But learning NVivo, the university literally gave me a 2-day course and I
Yeah.
spent another day watching videos on YouTube. So it needs that kind of investment in time to know how to use it well. And I rarely end up saying to an undergrad student, use NVivo, because I think the way you just talked about and I mentioned works just as well. And I don't want people
Yeah.
to get scared about thematic analysis. It literally is like how that could be presented in an Excel table, for example.
And I'm so glad you've raised that, because I've had students similarly on undergraduates, mention they're looking at in vivo. And some people are coders, and for them, that is something that they're going to be able to access very quickly and very easily. Me, on the other hand, I'm using it for my PhD research, but I didn't use it for my master's because the time and effort it would have taken me to upskill myself would have been better used on what I was doing.
Is this
But
NVivo or just thematic analysis generally?
in
You mean
vivo.
NV? Yeah.
Within vivo, yeah, because thematic analysis, by using kind of, I was a teacher, so using the kind of the ways that I already work, I used it for me in that sense. um but what I would suggest here is that it can be fantastic when you're kind of coming to your methodology section, is to put in your appendix how you got to the process you did. So I took screenshots at different stages to help show my thinking. And I know certainly when you're at kind of doctorate level, that's expected. But would you like to add in a little bit more about that, about how students can be evidencing this for any write-ups?
I would just agree really with what you're saying, is
Mhm.
that when the person's reading it and marking it, they should be able to see what you've done. And so just saying I did thematic analysis brackets Braun and Clarke 2006 is not that. It's like, here's an example of how it looked, and that would be
Yeah,
in the methodology chapter.
yeah,
Because once you get to the results and analysis chapter, or that may be called findings and analysis, you want to be getting straight down to presenting your findings. So
hmm,
in that sense, the methodology chapter is the place to show your working, if you like,
hmm,
isn't it?
yeah,
And exactly as you said, kind of screenshots, a description of one example. So the sort of way we've been talking about that, how a code kind of goes up the pyramid to a theme.
yeah,
Brown and Clarke have labels for this sort of thing, like
yeah,
a code and then a category and then a theme, I think.
yeah.
But just show how that looked. Don't leave it to the imagination of the person marking it. It'll look really robust if you can show an example of it, like you say, with screenshots and description of it.
Yeah, and I'd say even adding in for people who are doing it on paper, I've seen people take literal pictures of their highlighting, of their different colors and highlighting, and some of their notes around it. And I've loved seeing that because I can see them interacting with their research, and they're showing me that they were analysing it.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing I'd like people to take from this is if you feel like doing it on paper with coloured pens and highlighters is what will work for you, it can work like that.
Hmm.
There's nothing in Brown and Clarke's stuff that's like doctrine that says you must use NVivo to do it, or
Yeah.
programs like it. So the principle can work in whatever way you feel comfortable with.